Hello, Mike.
Hello, Jack. As you said, happy May 1st.
If you may first,
Happy
yeah.
May 1st. Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay. But how and good to see you. And we were just catching up, but I'm thinking there's a few things to talk about, and I know we don't have a ton of time. But I
Mm,
do want I'm enjoying your as you pointed out earlier, well, there's a few thoughts that I've shared.
mm.
I think my lazy the first chapter of the lazy thing I finally published. Is that what you were looking at, or were you looking at the one about the atom bomb?
Well, I was looking at the thing that we were just discussing was that interface to data sets, which
Oh,
I
okay.
think was just, hey, some sort of a table, maybe in Excel, maybe in something else, and then a little box with a question, and that is kind of like a paradigm or archetype of kind of how the future of AI might look like.
Well, I think well, you probably brought up one of the more. I think it's probably a much more well accepted use of AI, which we appreciate, which is its sort of ability to translate, right? Like there's a thing where there's just a language that I don't know, which is all of
Mm,
them. And I'm right in the midst of a book about a thing that I don't know about. Uh, Yet, honestly, I have thought about for at least 40 years, but I never understood it.
mm,
And with AI's help, I actually not only understand it, I'm writing another book about it because I came up with something that I thought was actually worth sharing about this topic. But I'll save that for a minute. But it's this idea of taking something unknowable,
mm.
or let's say challenging to know. And I think you had a good example of this, right? Didn't you talk about a textbook once? You remember I think textbooks could be the best example of this, right? Is like, here you go,
Mm.
right? And you're supposed to take in this information and then somehow apply it and then are assessed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, kind of, in our academic life, that was the case, right? So the premise behind the textbooks, right, in academia or kind of in any learning process is that you have that kind of lecture material, here's the formula or whatever, right? And then there is like 2 or 3 pages of exercises that you are supposed to
Mm.
do. And a good textbook will kind of be like a good video game, right? Like, you will win the battle after a good fight, right? And then the same is with exercises at the end of each chapter in a kind of programming textbook or math textbook, right? Like, hey, it's going to be hard, but you will be able to get it, right? You're going to be able to solve the problem.
Hmm.
And there's kind of like multiple layers of difficulties here. First of all, is that it's so difficult to actually do that, right? And construct those
Yeah, no, I'm
exercises.
like, I think that's a very, very specific skill,
And
right?
then
To
there is a
be
second,
able, right.
yeah. And then there is a second problem that actually nobody, among students, almost nobody does that, right?
Hmm.
So, do you know? I mean, I can count very few students that I knew that actually would go like beginning to an end. Hey, I solve all the problems from the end of the chapter, and that cost me, a few weekends. But I think now I have enough repetitions and enough training to actually being able to digest this and apply it, right?
Hmm.
Rather than just kind of, hey, I think I remember that formula, but I'm not quite sure, right? So there's that. But so yeah, so many problems around all this.
Well, and so the revolution, at least maybe, and I'm always feeling more optimistic because the revolution is that you don't have a book, right? You have a sort of a query engine, kind of
Yeah.
like the Google, like Google is, but instead of relying upon someone else to explain something, it can recontextualize that to your own skill level. And one of my things, I don't know how often you really chat with AI over any topic, but my go-to is to be as completely dense and self-referential as possible in my query, just to test how well it can unpack things, which it always does a great job. I'm really I'm really impressed that whatever my stochastics are. Oh, and not to mention, I asked it. I think it's four GPT-4, and I'm not sure about the rest of them. Are starting to build models about you. So it does know me now, and for some reason, almost all of my responses end with poems for this reason, because it knows that I sort of appreciate such things, I guess, that are, or at least I've taught it how. And I'm fascinated because I'm certain that nobody else gets this, which is even weirder, right? Like it sort of wants to talk in the language that you feel most affinity towards. I mean, I think that's interesting. Unlike professors like you and me, yeah, I don't talk any different depending on the student, right? Like my hope is they ignore me as much as possible and talk amongst themselves, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, so intellectually, right? That's kind of very useful, right? So being able to, hey, you customize the responses so that they are, adding poems or Yoda language or something like that. So this is really
like
cool.
that.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
So Mathematica, for example, the Wolfram Mathematica, they, if you are interacting with their system, they have like probably 50 personas, and it could be like King George, or it could be like I guess somebody like a gang member of the street, and so they have a wide range of customizations, and yeah, I definitely kind of see the need, right? Like people would like to interact with characters that they like, and just around the corner there is going to be graphics, right? There's going to be avatars, and so yeah, this is going to be very special.
Well, and I want to take it one further because one of my recent articles, which I haven't published, but it was my first attempt into actual historical research. So with the help of Perplexity, I had a question, and maybe I could ask if you're familiar with this before I get into the atomic bomb part. We don't have too much time, but here's the story. The story goes, once upon a time, the model of the universe was heliocentric, and it was just sort of being challenged by Copernicus, but the biggest problem that happened was the supernova that nobody could explain because the heavens were all in crystal spheres surrounded by, perfect this, that's, and the others. So you probably vaguely remember this story, perhaps, but there was this particular person who I remembered being instrumental in this, which was Tycho Brahe or I don't know, a Dane, a fellow Dane, who spent 20 years to catalog the stars. Do you know this story?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
But what I didn't know, and do you know how incredibly improbable it is that this and this other guy, do you know who the other guy is?
Well, no, there was
There's two
Copernicus,
guys,
right?
basically the
Yeah.
weirdest two people on Earth. Tycho with the brass nose, right? You remember the nose? He got his nose cut off.
Oh yeah, really? That was. I thought it was just in the pictures. I
No,
don't
no, no,
know.
no, no.
That I
It was
didn't
in,
know. I
by
didn't
the
know
way,
that.
you would love this. It was in a duel with his cousin over who was the better mathematician. That was the duel, and he got his
Oh.
nose cut off in school. He was in school, in his Ivy League school, as I call it. He was sent off from Denmark to go study at a fancy college, and of course got way too drunk most of his life, actually. And then he built a pleasure palace. Anyway, so the thing is, I'm researching this. I did not know this story, but everything I got led to another question, if that makes sense, right? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
why this? Why that? But I'm not. I'll send you the story. It hasn't been published yet, but it turned out that I was able to find out something that I think has never ever been told. This story came from my one. I was a little bit angry about people canceling my friend's 20-year experiment. He has an experiment that's been going on for 20 years, and that reminded me of Tycho, 20 years, right? And all of the data that he collected, back to data, right? You have this data that you want to ask a question to. And the question was, who's the center of the universe? And the improbable thing that happened was this guy, brass-nosed, who actually ended up dying of not going to the bathroom at a big feast. He drank too much and he exploded from the inside. Like, he is the most incredible character ever. I love him dearly, but it's Kepler. Kepler's the mathematician. Have you ever heard of
Oh yeah, Kepler. Yeah,
Kepler?
of course. Yeah, yeah.
So it was Kepler and the data and the ability to analyze the data and that story is even more incredible. Kepler, honestly, is probably one of the biggest heroes I could imagine. Everything was against him. Like, everything on Earth was against this guy doing what he did, which was all he wanted to do, is kind of like, write these big tales about how like, it's this big understanding the universe thing that people, are still doing.
Yeah, I mean the orbital motion equations that he came up with, that was really remarkable, because
it is.
They had very limited observation kind of capability, and they have just pen and paper. So that was really big.
Well, this was the odd couple. The ability to build the pleasure palace of instrumentation, which was like Shangri-La in real life, right? Like, he got all the money to do this, but then when his benefactors kicked him out, he was just left with this data, which he didn't have. He doesn't have the ability to know what to do with. And then this actually poor Protestant guy coming from Germany, who was also in the same. Anyway, I'm going to send you the story. It to me, but the star of this was AI helping me answer these questions about these records, because honestly, I think it's a story that's never been told, but it's all factually true.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
so storytelling, we always go back to it, right? Storytelling can be richer, I think, than ever with these tools. Just like you said, with your quarterly report, great. But imagine the stories you can tell with these worlds that you don't understand. And you can't read the text. I couldn't read all the books that have been written about these people, right? And in fact, I just saw one on TV that skipped over it. I was actually really pissed, because I was like, you skipped over this part, and this part is literally the most significant part ever, that things are not circular. Things aren't round. And that leads me to atomic weapons, because it literally did. I mean, that's what led to relativity. Or it led to Newton. Actually, Newton name checks Kepler. Like, I wouldn't understand this if it wasn't for Kepler, and then of course it keeps going. But
yeah, so that's kind of relevant to what I'm thinking about and working on, actually. That so what is AI supposed to have insight into, right? Like, obviously we are focusing on the data, right? So here's the table, like in this example that you gave me, and or whatever Kepler collected. They have some data, but then there is also something else, like the AI should have insight into what the research process is supposed to be, so that you can actually understand, and come up with some new stuff, right? Like perhaps, kind of, we can see this in show business quite a bit. Like, maybe, if you look at, the bands like Nirvana, for example, right? A lot of their revolutionary or music, or maybe if it wasn't revolutionary, it was kind of like different, right? Everybody knew that Nirvana is one of the best bands in the world at the time that they were at the top. so how did they come up with this music, right? Like, what is their process, right? And maybe there was substances or maybe whatever, right? But that kind of like this meta level knowledge, like, hey, here you're supposed to do something and then something else, and maybe it's intuitive, maybe not, is kind of another piece that the AI should be able to see. Like, hey, here's the knowledge graph of a discovery process, right? And how is discovery process supposed to look like? That's a big question.
Oh, well, you bring up, yeah, I mean, that to me is already kind of unprecedented, right? I mean, it's not status quo. You are supposed to do your due diligence and you do your homework and all these other kind of things. And I think my new phrase, right, is to take your time. Time in thought is kind of our superpower, right? I think that's what we have to start to appreciate that we can do, because the work itself, in many ways, right, can be done very quickly, and that's what helped me in this research. If I had to go and read if I had to read 5 books and then kind of like mentally put it all together, like I would get bored and abandon it instantly, right? Like it isn't my thing. But we now will say that, hey, you've got the people interviewed in this story I saw, like they're the Cambridge what were they, the Cambridge professor of astronomy, right, or something like that. Like, well, you're going to devote your life and have read all those books so that you can say something that now I have personally proved not correct. That's what was really amazing to me. Like, I learned through my own effort, which wasn't hard, but was focused on this topic, right? Something that the person, they couldn't describe, right? They couldn't articulate it, even though they're an absolute expert, right? So I keep thinking the brittleness of expertise is going to be another trend we should probably keep our eye on, if we're not both victims of it already, right? Like, that because your biases become quite crystalled, and you could easily say, well, the AI answer isn't what, I wouldn't say it like that, but I don't think that the AI would ever have the same biases if it read the same books, right? It literally was astonishing because it was building timelines around all the terrible things that happened to Kepler, which you really needed to keep track of the timeline because they were so poorly, they happened at all the wrong times, basically, for him to complete this masterwork. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we're all talking about 500 years ago. So obviously they were known, but to build a narrative is extremely challenging to do, right? But what I found, maybe to your point and where I'd love your thoughts, is the point wasn't the timeline. The point was the emotional cost he had to pay that he did pay. That's what, like, the truth behind it was his own, he wouldn't give up. He wouldn't fudge it, which is what I keep saying. Like, you were on the hook to produce this book of tables, right? From his observations, and you wouldn't do it because it didn't fit the model. Heliocentrism didn't work. Heliocentric is the sun, and what's the Earth-centric is well, either way, geocentric, thank you. Neither fit the data, and he wouldn't give it up. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Because it's easy enough to fudge it. Honestly, he would have come out much better, and then everything at that point went wrong for him. Everything in the world that could go wrong. So my point wasn't to do tons of research. It was more like on the human scale. And that's what I think both of us I'm fascinated with, is can we measure human emotional work?
Yeah. It is so anti-enterprise, right? Anti-corporate, that question, right? Like, this is, you have an example of an astronomer or a mathematician, and he was kind of devoting his life to something, and his audience was like maybe 5 people in the world
Yeah.
that
Oh,
kind of
easy.
understood.
Nobody.
Right.
Nobody cared.
So that kind of reminds me a little bit of the show in the Mad Men, where you have the main character Don Draper, and there was a scene where he's basically sleeping on his couch, during the working hours, during the day, and his boss walks into his office and says, "Hey, I'm glad I can see you're working," right? So there, and they are, nobody is embarrassed by the situation at all, because there is this mutual understanding that Don Draper is a brilliant guy, and he
Yeah,
needs to be able to close his eyes and think, right? And
absolutely.
the boss understands that, even though he might be kind of brash and a little bit kind of not the best character in this show, but you see, I mean, that is kind of the thing. We are kind of looking at the mental cost of being brilliant, right, and being kind of opposed by everybody, and you have to have a leadership quality, and that is, yeah, that has a that may mean that you are not capable of writing 20 emails and 5 memos every day about all those things that you are thinking about.
Well, I think the thing of value or effectiveness, right? I mean, if you
Yeah.
emotion, value, and effectiveness are very tied, right? That
Mm.
it is the inspiring mission statement that keeps
Yeah.
people focused upon what they're there to do, and the values of a company are. I mean, people talk a lot about that. Like, that's apparently the job of management, is to create an environment where good things happen, right? That
Mm.
you're just like in a teacher. If you create an environment that's very antagonistic, or that you are very harsh on people when they make mistakes, well, you've been there.
Mm.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
It backfires, and that's why I always spend way more time on people who are not doing well than people who are doing well, to my own problem, right? Like, I want them to do well, even
Mm.
though that is up to them. And I think that these relationships, to me, get more nuanced because I don't have to spend all the time. I can just ask, hey, this person didn't do this, this, and this. I certainly think that some sort of, you and I are both dr dreaming about the system that could start to catalog this stuff, right? Or to be able to quantify it in some ways, to give people insight. And I think
Mm.
of that being personal insight. So I came up with a thought experiment the other day. I said, well, what if you said, hey, what do you think of Michael? And you'd be like, well, he's pretty good. He's all right. And he said, well, give me a 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, whatever. Give me a scale for Michael. And you'd be like, it's like a 70. And it's like, well, what if do you think Michael shows up on time every day? And it's like, oh, well, yeah, Michael shows up on time. It's like 90%, 95,
Mm.
pretty reliable, right? He's like, well, is
Mm.
Michael professional? Does he seem to, convey? Yeah, he's like 95%. And then imagine these questions kept going, right? It's already
Mm.
tedious, but you get I said, well, once you've gotten this picture, does your overall impression of Michael change? Because both of us love confidence intervals, right?
Mm. Mm.
And what if it did, right? What if the measures of what a person does, or their effectiveness, was as important as your impression of them? Do you see what I
Mm.
mean? And I'm like, well, great. And then, of course, GPT is very nice to me, and it's like, oh, that would be a great insight for the employee to know that this, that, or the other, right? Like, I was like, well, no, what if it was an insight for the person who's
Mm.
judging people? What if your judgments are poor? Right? What if you needed to learn to judge people better? Well, my point being is that the sword often is
Mm.
pointing toward one direction in business, right?
Yeah.
But it could instead point the other way. which would be even, I think, more useful, is to understand how do you actually manage people.
Mm.
Because I can tell you right now, it's all based on, oh, they look bad that one day, right? You know, hey,
Mm.
I saw their shoes were untied and they said that dumb thing in that meeting. So therefore my opinion of them is around, 50%.
Mm. Mm.
Right? Oh, they made that stupid presentation. See what I mean? Like we are
Mm.
really, really bad at understanding other people. I think, especially work situations. But you know me, I'm never one to not have hyperbole. But you have a better measured perspective. I know.
No, I think that, so I think you have multiple aspects of measurement, and I totally agree that there might be some kind of like outliers or prevailing or kind of special categories that have precedence over something else, right? Like, uh, so yeah, I mean, yeah, Mike shows up, Mike is smart, right? Mike is professional, but he was wearing brown shoes, and that is, yeah, no, absolutely not. So that kind of reduces his overall score. So that is possible. So perhaps this is the role of AI, right? Like, hey, this is not exactly this kind of like
Slam
black.
dunk. I'm
Yeah,
saying it's easy for AI.
yeah, to be kind of like neutral and impartial, and really kind of have like a better measurement kind of machinery kind of underneath. Uh, However, so we are still, let's say we are evening out. Let's say the only thing that AI is going to do for us is going to remove those outliers, so that Mike's brown shoes is no longer kind of like a absolutely disqualifying factor, right? Then still the question would remain: how do we measure things, right? Like, how do we measure intelligence, for example, right? Like, we want smart people in our corporation, so we're gonna give them a test, right? And that
Sure.
test is going to be something crazy, like the Google gotcha questions, interview questions or something, right? So then we are not going to escape the fundamental thing. Like, AI is going to be nicer. AI might be more impartial, but still, how do we measure things would be kind of difficult, because Don Draper in the show sleeping on the couch looks terribly, and he is also a hangover, and he's also gonna kind of have 10 drinks, before noon. But at 3 he's gonna walk into the meeting and this is gonna be brilliant, right? Uh, so how do you sort this out? I don't know, but you definitely don't want to fire Don Draper.
Well, and I think this is the thing that I spent 40 years not understanding, and I'll tell you
Mhm.
about it next time. But
Mhm.
the reason why I came across this and the answer to all questions like this to me is always wave mechanics, right? So everything is a wave. Everything
Mhm.
is always changing, and that's the problem with the way we assess, right? It's fixed in time. He is unreliable. He's reliable. He's unreliable. See what I mean is
Mhm.
if you imagine a new employee or any venture at all, we want it to be like this, right? This is,
Mhm.
you know, put Jack on the job and we have achieved our goal, right? Burn down is always up. And I'm like, no, it's always down and then up. Everything is always a sunk cost of context building, right? And
Mhm.
you could say that, hey, some people come in, Don Draper comes in with a little less downside, but unfortunately no, everything has to build infrastructure, right? He isn't a, hopefully maybe Don Draper is a one person brilliance factory, which might be an anomaly, right? But we work with others, right? And we're never like, hey, if only Jack could do everything. I think that would be actually a negative use of AI, right? To get rid of it actually should be a amplifier for collaboration, I hope, right? Because it's collaboration and communication that's hard. getting us all on the right path together is super challenging. This is right. This is not even, it's mathematically provable too, I'm sure, but it's getting people to sync. And that includes you, your team, your boss, in any world, or our government or our city or whatever, getting things to align is possible. Right? I mean, this is maybe against my Kepler thing, but he still took quite a lot of blows and a lot of time for nothing except changing the universe in the end, right? That was only after his death,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah. So the majority of people, they were just those strange guys that are wasting their time, probably, and probably there was also a religious aspect to it, right? Like,
Yes.
hey,
Oh, yeah.
maybe they are kind of into witchcraft or something, I mean, who
You
knows,
are
right?
so, you've almost gotten parts of my story. You should wait, and I will send it to you. I think you'll be happy.
Yeah, so
Um,
so that they had huge oppositions, right? And so in their time, they were like Dawn Drapers, except that they never had a chance to demonstrate their brilliance because there was no audience, right?
well, in a sense they did. It's just that we, in our modern time, we might be just hungry for new stuff, but it was like, I heard apparently, Paul Dirac.
Mhm.
Paul Dirac is, I'm learning physics in my spare time. So anyway, the funny story about Dirac was he was not just, he was a thinker. Basically, they had a joke about him that in a conversation, a Dirac was the minimum amount of things that you could say and still be in the conversation. So he would think long and hard, and he wanted a universe that he ended up creating. But what was interesting, I think, in the way he was introduced, they said something like his favorite movie was 2001: A Space Odyssey because of the time it took, like, to tell a story, or the patience it had, or something like that. This pause that we keep talking about,
Mhm.
right? Don asleep on the couch or whatever. Um, it's wrong because, of course, he did all his work in the 20s and that came out in 68 or whatever. So he was much older then. He could still love the movie, but the idea of being able to think long and hard and have that infrastructure built up can have these obviously explosively large impacts on everything, right? So I think we're still just in this phase where we're kind of figuring. I do not think there's a hype cycle for AI. This is my other thing. I don't think it'll go down because I think it's more like this. Like, we're still stabilizing around what it
Mhm.
can do, and we have not quite figured out what it does. So while we're obviously investing in hardware and probably hiring people and so on and so forth, I think it's still fun to talk about with you.
Mhm. Yeah. It is a lot of fun to kind of think about this, and I think one of the aspects of AI that we are not understanding very well is how memory functions.
Mhm.
Um, so there's quite a few papers out there that kind of compares different ways, to kind of like how come, what is the best representation of the fact that Mike probably prefers to have like a poem at the end of the answer, that comes from an AI, right? Or something like that, right? So how do we know that this poem is supposed to show up, all the time? Or maybe not, maybe just for certain questions, or maybe for some other questions you want to be right to the point, and for some other questions you would like to have them kind of with an image attached or something, right? So all these things will kind of be kind of transitioning us perhaps from this kind of like reactive question answer kind of a deal to this artificial general intelligence, where there's there might be enough scientific papers, there might be enough textbooks, there might be enough stuff that the AI can look at so that those answers, kind of come with appropriate memory application, and they are no longer just clever answers. They are kind of like AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence that we would appreciate a lot more. That's kind of my feeling, right? And maybe that's where the next breakthrough will happen. Not bigger large language models, but actually better models or more extensive models of memory. However whatever it should contain, right? So
well, and I think it's fine in that realm. I just think what it says to me is emotions are now our major emotions it will never get. That's what I'm saying. Like it can't. And causality is another thing is really hard for AI to understand. So we live in a world of emotions and causality, and that's what we got to double down on. That's all. I'm like, we know this stuff better than anyone, right? Which is back to my atomic bomb thing, is the thing goes is how I learned to stop worrying about AI and trust the bomb, because the thing I learned that I never understood and had to worry about for 40 years, right, is I never understood E equals MC squared, because it was always tied to the bomb. And what was funny is only with AI and a big leap of not understanding why the speed of light is squared. I did not understand how you can take the maximum speed limit and square it. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And the thing I learned was basically how the universe worked, which I didn't know, and no one had ever explained it. So I'm writing this book for kids because it's almost like a kid's story to me of why everything is the way it is. And it became clear that once you could ask the right questions, that some of these things that were always poorly explained actually started to make sense. It's fun.
Yeah,
But
it is.
the emotional relevance to me is now going to be the new currency, hopefully, of why AI, because again, both of us, you especially being incredibly intelligent, we know that who cares, right? Like nobody's like lauding us or something. And obviously you've had many intelligent people, but that's not a currency. Whereas emotions and actions are currency, right? If I choose to put all my money in the stock market today rather than sell everything like I did the other day, see, those are consequential actions, at least in my little mind, right? But people are doing that every day. They're making all these decisions and they're all emotional. Every single one of them is an emotional decision. Intelligence means almost nothing in the face of emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I always disagree with you on that point, right? Like, hey, AI, it's in my opinion, it's relatively easy to get for the AI to actually model emotions, right? Like, it's relatively easy to construct the model of an emotional response, depending on the context, or depending on decision that you are facing. I mean, that probably is something that, so whether there is a ghost in the machine or not, whether the machine truly feels, or whether the machine has a very good model of a feeling, to me it's a moot point, right? To you, I think that you are always kind of interested in kind of like a deeper and deeper kind of meaning, and and I and maybe that is going to be resolved maybe only in the quantum computing realm, where we gonna be able to kind of do something kind of like this EMC squared, like, hey, the universe kind of now you can connect the atoms, right? You can kind of model things, the way the universe is created, which is in the nanotech area, not in the electron area, which is not nano, right? So these kind of things. So
Sure.
I don't know, but I think that I would be more optimistic in terms of emotional modeling, and yeah, not sure how it
I think it's worth, it definitely isn't unreasonable, although then I'm thinking my goal in getting the people who were poor performers was to interact with them more and to kind of use whatever tools I had to help them move forward, right? Not always emotional, but let's just say pretend that people have a little fear of their professors, right? We hold a little bit of power or something. I don't know. They want something and we can keep it for them. Um, I'm curious though that the minute AI is like, get out of bed, stop screwing around. Here's your first meeting for today, and here's the prop. See what I mean? Once it starts to be a emotional taskmaster, I think people then will just learn to ignore it. Like they do everybody
Well,
else who does this, right? Like,
but that is even a simpler problem because that is behavioral design. That I
yeah,
would say that is going to be something that can be handled even easier than maybe deeper questions of the feeling, right? So yeah, I think that yeah, there's something definitely for another discussion in there,
for
but
another,
I
for sure.
yeah, but I feel like yeah, I think this is something that we're our model, if we create a model of an emotional response in a business like setting, I think that is something that is doable today for us.
Yes, right. I think as a is what is the word? Like it's not a mirror, right? It's more, this is the thing. It's presence. As we look at the our stock going up and down, right? We begin to fantasize, right? That's our job, to fantasize why. But when we talk about people going up and down, which they do, that I think is a very interesting insight. And I was just mentioning this before. I work for a company, by the way. This company knows everything about you, right? It knows you personally. It has data on you, very, very authoritative. Yet nobody can figure out what to do with it. That's my problem. Like there is no way to actualize it. Whereas
Mm.
now that I've been more and more engaging with GPT, especially, I kind of am picking GPT because it's pretty good, is building this model of me. And I wondered about it. I'm like, is this like a marketing model? Like, is it change? Like, how does it update? Do you have facts? Like, do you have a taxonomy that you're building about me? And it can sort of answer that, but then it gets into corporate speak. There's some little areas it doesn't like to talk about, which is fine. I mean, that's cool. I'm sure they think of it being alarmist, but I was like, no, I mean, if you can model me, my biggest problem was your context window is going to be freaking insane if you ever actually try to understand people, right? Like it might be back to your quantum computer. When you have an endless context window, I'm going to stop there because that is a crazy thought.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and probably the biggest limitation right now is that the context window is
Oh,
relatively small.
tiny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, till next time, Jack.
All
Always a
right.
pleasure.
Yeah, that
Solving the
was good. Yeah.
problems of the universe. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mike.
All right.
That was a good discussion.
Absolutely. Cheers. Next time.